Welcome. I'm Glenn Anderson with the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. For 27 years, this TV series has explored a wide variety of issues that relate to peace, social justice, and nonviolent social change. We especially provide opportunities for the public to hear voices and viewpoints that are not often heard in mainstream media. Everybody knows that the criminal justice system in the United States is full of problems. Some of the problems are well known, but our society and our political system seem unable to solve them. And yet workable solutions do exist. During this hour, we will examine some of the problems in our criminal justice system with a special emphasis on racial disparities, and we'll look also at a variety of solutions. I'm happy that we have three guests with us who are especially well informed. Larry Jefferson has 17 years of experience as a defense attorney in King County and in Thurston County, where he provides legal defense for low-income persons through the Thurston County Office of Assigned Counsel. He is also president of Thurston County Bar Association. During this TV interview, he will speak only as an individual and not in either of those professional roles and not for either of those organizations. Sam Merrill chairs a statewide Quaker-based nonprofit organization, the Friends Committee on Washington Public Policy, FCWPP, often known as FCWIP, which works on criminal justice and a number of other social and economic problems at the state level. FCWIP researches the issues, educates the public, and advocates for significant reforms at the state legislature. Stephen Aldrich works with FCWIP as the legislative advocate and policy analyst. He and a number of other FCWIP members do really impressive work. So good to have you all here.
Good to be here.
The United States imprisons more people than any other nation in the world. This is true in raw numbers and also on a per capita basis. We have about 5% of the world's population, but we imprison about 25% of the number of people imprisoned anywhere on the planet. Can you show us some graphs, Sam, to illustrate the numbers and then discuss what's been happening, what some trends might be?
Okay. The United States really holds a rather unique position as it has a higher rate of incarceration of its people than any other country that we might reasonably compare it with. And the graph here shows that the rate of incarceration for the United States, which is the blue bar on the left, is higher than any of the other countries here. Russia is the only other one that is even near in the same ballpark. And compared with countries in Europe, in Western Europe, Britain, France, and Germany have about a fourth, or in most cases considerably less than a fourth as many people per capita in prison. Same sort of thing is true for Canada.
You have another slide that shows us what's been happening here, and tell us what that shows.
And this is not something that has been true all along. If you go back to 1930 and follow up to the 1970s, the rate of incarceration in the United States ran along at about a level pace, and then it has increased exponentially since that time during the last 40 years. And in fact, before 1970, the rate of incarceration in the U.S. was fairly similar to that of countries in Western Europe and Canada, and those countries have remained at about the same level, whereas now the U.S. is about 5 times as high as what it was 40 years ago. You also see Washington State on the same graph here. It has gone up by about a factor of 3, somewhat less than the nation as a whole, but still very substantially in ascent.
Okay, so let's look at the racial disparities. You have one that compares, because this is compelling, and these early slides here will be some of the basic information we'll be working from in the program and looking for reasons and what the problems are and what the solutions will be. including the racial disparities that are
Okay.
unjust and shocking.
Okay, now we're looking at a comparison between two racial groups and one ethnic group. And we see that if you look first at the blue bars, they represent the entire United States. The rate of incarceration, that is per capita, for African Americans is about 6 times as high as that for whites. Hispanics are in between, something like twice as much as for whites. And the situation in Washington State reflects the national situation very closely. Mm-hmm. So it's very much the same thing. So there's a very definite racial disparity in the rate of incarceration.
Right. Now,
that's something we need to explain.
Right, and given the numbers of people involved in this, this would not be just like a chance occurrence. With these numbers, this really means something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're 6 times more likely if you're African American to be incarcerated than if you're white. And it looks to me like the green bar shows that Washington actually has a little bit greater disparity than the nation as a whole.
Yeah, I've seen figures showing that this kind of pattern is true for like kids being expelled from school for behavior problems. And I mean, these patterns are out there, and that's what we need to talk about during the show. Larry, you have 17 years of experience as a defense attorney, so you've seen a lot of this right before your eyes.
Well, I've seen it when I go into courtrooms, that typically the people that I'm representing will be black, and it's just mind-boggling that, for instance, the attorneys in the room, I'll be the only black person, but yet in the pews will be filled with African Americans. Mm-hmm. And it's mind-boggling how that can happen when you have prosecutors who are trying their best not to focus on a person's race. When they read a police report, they're not focusing on that. They're focusing on a crime. Yet, time and time again, we'll see the same disparities.
Yeah. So when we raise these issues here on this program, we're not talking about bad apples that are deliberately trying to make it tough for certain groups of people. It's something in the system, even if a person does not have that malicious, racist intent.
Well, what it reminds me of is you will have 2 individuals who will come into the courtroom. One would be white, one would be black. They can even be part of the same case. The prosecutor will want to treat them the same, yet because of other factors outside of court, the prosecutor won't be able to keep them the same, like letting them go home on like bail or release. If the family of the African American is not stable, meaning that maybe a parent can't come home and stay with a kid, or if no one can call in to give an address for this particular person. The person could be all ready for release, but because they have no address, they can't be released. Mm-hmm. When you can't be released, it's more likely that you're going to be convicted of a crime. For children who have no criminal history, if you can get released, you have the chance to get your case deferred if you can show good behavior and that you're a good member of the community. But if you can't get out of jail, you can't get the opportunity to get your case deferred, and you get a criminal conviction on your record. It could be a felony, and it restarts the whole problem all over again, and you lose out on the benefits of citizenship.
So there's a pattern, there's a cluster of things, and they all interact.
Oh, absolutely.
And yeah. When we were talking on the phone to prepare for the program, you mentioned even like jury selection and other steps in the process where you have these disparities.
Well, yes, and the Washington Supreme Court has just dealt with that in a case called State versus St. Cali, where the courts were looking at how juries were selected, and in a jury trial, there are ways that you can remove a juror from from the jury. One is by doing a challenge for cause, meaning that you have to give a reason why you are excluding that person.
And the idea is from the standpoint of fairness, they can't say, well, I don't want you on the jury because you're the wrong color. They have to have some race-neutral reason to exclude a person.
Well, and where that applies is on peremptory challenges, the attorneys don't have to give a reason. However, you can raise what's called the Batson challenge to say that if an African American is removed from the jury and they're the only African American on the jury, you can raise a Batson challenge to say there has to be a race-neutral reason. Yet any good attorney can come up with a race-neutral reasoning. And so what the court found was that in all of the Batson challenges that were coming up, that it was there was maybe one decision out of the whole history of the court where the Batson challenge had been upheld, meaning that each time that these challenges were being made, the judge said, no, there's no issue. And yet there is study upon study that have found that there is minorities are being excluded from juries. So you have the studies say that it's happening, but the courts aren't enforcing it. So in this decision, Justice Gonzalez,
This is on the state Supreme
the
Court.
state Supreme Court, said we should get rid of peremptory challenges altogether in his dissent because it would, because sometimes people subconsciously used racist thoughts to get rid of people in the jury. For instance, in cases that I did, prosecutors would get rid of African American people on the jury because they would relate to me. A jury is all about relationships. So if the jury relates to me, they're more likely to rule in my favor. You get rid of the people that relate to either the client or the attorney. And so an attorney wants to go in to win the case. You're not necessarily trying to be racist. You just want to win.
Yeah.
And so Justice Gonzalez said, well, let's get rid of peremptory challenges so that an attorney always has to give a reason for getting rid of someone. And that has some benefit to it, but it also has some cons to it.
Yeah.
Because defense attorneys, I cannot imagine a world without a peremptory challenge because every trial that I've ever done, I've been able to exercise one. And so it's something that attorneys, they will consult with their clients about who to have on the jury. So it's a precept that you have a right to a fair trial and a jury of your peers. And so there's some defense attorneys who would believe prosecutors don't have a right to a fair trial. It is the defendant. So they don't need peremptory challenges. Only the defendant does.
Because the right to a fair trial is looking at it from the defendant's standpoint, not the state standpoint.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I recently wrote an article in the Thurston County Bar talking about issues of racism, and I started out with objection. Counsel is a racist. That's how the other side feels when you raise a Batson challenge. A good prosecutor would get very offended. And so you have to be very careful when you raise one because you don't want to offend someone that you're going to have to work with. Yeah. But also, I was talking with a prosecutor today, and after he read that article, the next jury trial he was in, he was thinking about that issue. And it made him more clearly, I think, in my opinion, reflect on, okay, why do I... There was an African American on the jury, and he reflected on why he wanted this person to be on the jury. And he came to the conclusion he wanted this person to be on his jury because it would better reflect from the facts that he was trying to present. So I think that once people are aware of these issues, they can act on them. But before I wrote that article, he never would have thought about it.
Yeah, great. Did you have something to...
Well, I was just thinking that listening to Larry talk, it sort of turns the whole concept of a jury of your peers on its head. That people using the preemptory challenge unconsciously from what you said, but biased by the institutional racism that's part of the community and society we grow up in to take people out of the pool who would make a jury that was more reflective of the peers of the individual who's on trial.
Well, I think sometimes that we make decisions in studies that I've looked at just based on what the person's name is. We think that if the name is Hernandez, that this person must be Hispanic. Or if you hear a certain name, you're thinking that it's going to be an African-American person. And so in studies, they found that people will discriminate just based on the name that someone has. And so that's what we've got to remove those types of things from the system. It's not that a prosecutor is trying to be racist or that a person's trying to be. It's just that we have learned so many things, and it is just in the concept of Black Friday. That's supposed to be a negative connotation. It was a black day. It's so involved in our language, so deep down.
Well, the systemic stuff, even apart from individual intent, systemic stuff is in there. You think, for example, like jury of your peers, who gets excluded from juries because you're not even a registered voter? Well, felons who've not had voting rights restored. And who gets to be a felon who doesn't get their voting rights restored? Well, that falls on certain people by race and by an economic class. And even like with death penalty cases, I do a lot of work to abolish the death penalty. When they created a jury for a death penalty trial, they exclude anybody who opposes the death penalty. So you have what they call a death qualified jury, which is people who are predisposed to support the death penalty, probably people who are predisposed to convict. And because African Americans, for example, tend to be much more opposed to a larger percentage of African Americans opposed to the death penalty than whites, the jury tends to have African Americans underrepresented. And in fact, in Washington State, going all the way back, every jury who has sent somebody to death row has been all white in Washington.
Well, and studies that I have seen and heard about, what's interesting is that juries that are more diverse usually take more time in their decision-making process. And I think it's reflected that when you have people with different points of view and different experiences, that it adds and that these juries actually made better decisions when they had people of color involved in them.
Another element of what we're talking about is also economic class, which intersects but also is somewhat different. It cuts things at different dimension. Would any of you be able to explain some of the disparities that occur based on economic class, Sam?
I mean, basically, people who have low income, low education, low skills are much more likely to be drawn into the criminal justice system. And I can just give an example of having a few days ago sat in on pretrial hearings in which about 15 persons came before the judge, and in every case, they were able to qualify for indigent help. That is to say that they had a public defender who was, of course, from one of the colleagues of Larry. And they were not all black, they weren't all Hispanic, although there seemed to be more of them, certainly, than I would expect from Thurston County, probably considerably more. But it was clear that these are people who aren't able to negotiate our system, who, for one reason or another, don't have their life together, and certainly from a point of view of low income and low education, this will correlate with persons of minority because of background that they have had to come from. And it just becomes a vicious cycle that you end up with people who are in a lower economic class and being within a minority, and it goes around in a circle.
Yeah, and I mean, at the extreme low end of the income scale, where like somebody who's like so poor that they don't even have a place to live, like a homeless person, pretty much anything you do is going to be illegal. You know, if you don't have a bathroom, I have a bathroom. I have a house and a bathroom, so I can use that bathroom. If you don't have a house and a bathroom, where do you go? You know, if I want to drink a lot, I can do that at home. If I don't have a home and want to drink a lot, where do you do that? And you're out in public someplace. And so even without the intent of wanting to harass homeless folks or extremely low income people, that's sort of built into the reality of being extremely poor.
And a lot of these people that I was seeing, they were not there for their first crime. They were there because they hadn't met some particular hearing date. And it's the sort of thing that you get into if, say, you have a traffic fine and you can't pay for it, and you lose your license, and then you get picked up for that. But it all comes because you were really scrambling to try to get ahead, and conditions were not such that you could do it.
You mentioned, Larry, when we were preparing for the show here, that you run into a lot of people in that situation that Sam just described of having license suspended.
Yes, especially with driving while license suspended in the third degree, which is purely economic. So if someone will get that charge, but let's say they need to go to work. Well, when they're driving to work, they'll get another charge. And so it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle because they can't make enough money to pay the fines, to pay off the court, and then some courts use collection agencies, and the collection agencies pile on more fines. So the person just starts to spend more and more and more time in jail. Furthermore, these cases clog up the dockets, and they remove officers from patrol because the officer has to arrest this person. And what will happen in a lot of these cases is people will get bench warrants. And so they'll just be doing a routine traffic stop, and they'll talk to someone who's not doing a crime at that time, but they'll have a bench warrant for driving while license suspended. The officer has to then take that person from jail, go offline, not be able to fight real crime, do the paperwork, then that person sits in the jail, and then we all pay for it.
Well, and then that person who is driving to work without a license loses the job.
Exactly.
And the cycle just
and it keeps on
goes,
going on. So there are a lot of counties that are moving towards having relicensing programs.
Yeah. So from the standpoint of what we're trying to do with this program, which is help people understand some of these dynamics, and then get beyond the problems into solutions, you just mentioned one solution there to that.
Well, one solution is to do relicensing programs, have a forgiveness, have a person be able to come into court, and if you establish a payment plan with the court can then make a phone call or an email to the Department of Licensing. This person is now in this program. The person goes down to the Department of Licensing, gets their license reinstated. As long as you pay these funds and make it to something that you can pay, you've got your license. But it also takes prosecutors who maybe are, in my opinion, we shouldn't have that charge, or we should make it an infraction in order to deal with that issue, because it's clogging up the court dockets. So when people go to court, you might have 10 or 15 people who are dealing just with this charge. That takes a lot of the judge's time away from other very important issues.
And people try to speedy trial and the kind of efficiency that you would expect. Are there things that we should say about the folks who get caught up in the system?
Well, I was reading a study recently, and they talked about the criminal justice system as being a racializing system, the kind of thing that Larry's talking about kind of reinforces the pejorative images that we have of people who we label as African American. In as much as people get wrapped up in the criminal justice system, they can't go home because there's no one at home to take care of them, and then it turns out that there's a much higher probability of no one being at home because we're 6 times more likely to incarcerate someone who's African American than we are to incarcerate someone who's white. Interestingly, statistics show that crimes are not committed disproportionately by people African American. We just disproportionately arrest and convict people who are African American.
Well, and that's a classic example that more and more people are understanding is the war on drugs, which is partly responsible for that big upsurge. Exactly. And when they've studied, who actually is using these illegal drugs, it's pretty much spread across. But who gets busted, who gets sentenced to longer sentences, and that it's widely disparate.
Well, it's about enforcement. And so that's why, it's about where the police are focusing is who is coming into the system. If you're going to have some low-income apartments, there are going to be more things and more like domestic violence, more reports that happen in those cases. People are going to have more lower incomes, so they're going to be more reflected in those numbers. It's with the war on drugs, you could focus on arresting people who were downtown doing drug deliveries. Those are more likely going to be African American, individuals, rather than focusing on drug issues in middle class areas where the drug usage is at the same levels.
Yeah.
But it's harder to get at because people are in their homes. They're doing it more sophisticated.
It's spread out. It's hidden. It's not on the street.
Yeah. It's not that you can't do that. It's not that you can't find them. It's just that it's harder.
Yeah. We had this really notorious disparity in sentences for cocaine crimes. If it's the powder that you snort versus the crack that you smoke, and it was like the sentencing was like 100 to 1 disparity, and then Congress reformed it, so now it's only 10 to 1, and people are so pleased that we had this great victory. It's like, it's still 10 to 1. What's going on here?
Well, recently there was a congressman who was in a sting in Washington, D.C., and was just pled guilty to possession of cocaine, I think 3.5 grams. Well, in Washington, D.C., that apparently is a misdemeanor. That same activity here would be a felony. And so a person here in the state of Washington who's convicted of that would lose so many rights that it's unbelievable. It'd be harder to get a job, harder to get an apartment, be harder to be able to go to college. Yet this congressman can plead guilty to a misdemeanor. I think that's. I'm just completely. It depends on where you are. There are some counties that on a first-time drug offense they will reduce it down to a misdemeanor. However, there are other counties the same drug offense. They will not reduce it to a misdemeanor. So it matters on what prosecutor is in control, and it can totally devastate someone's life to get a felony drug conviction on their record.
Well, I hope we get some good results by legalizing marijuana usage in Washington, because that people have been trapped so much in this war on drugs. So making that legal, if you're not causing problems with it or selling whatever, Anyway,
that seems like that sort of thing is the first step. It's partly what prosecutors are doing. It's partly what police may do, all the way, and maybe doing this unconsciously. But laws need to be changed, such as the marijuana one. Because of the mandatory minimum sentences that we have. This is one of the major reasons why we have had such an enormous increase in our rate and compared with other countries that are comparable.
Yeah, we had this obsessive get tough on crime mania going on for a few decades here, and if we can, the public is starting to wise up from that, and when Colorado and Washington voted to legalize, that's a step in the right direction. And if we can do some more things, that would help. Is there anything else you want to say about this tough on crime mania that I'm hoping we're at the tail end of.
Well, you know, I think there seems to be a growing consensus that tough on crime and the increased incarceration rates that were on the slide that Sam shared earlier have not benefited society to the degree that people had hoped. And you know, there's now an organization of conservatives called Right on Crime that includes Newt Gingrich, who are saying, you know, we need to look more closely at the increasing amount of public resources that we're devoting to incarcerating people, that we're not getting a good return on that, and that it's causing us to have to give up opportunities and to provide services in other areas. Our criminal justice funding is competing with education and healthcare and everything else that we ask the state to help us with.
Yeah.
I think with those longer sentences, what happens with those sentences is we now have to provide those felons with health care. We now have to take care of them for longer and longer amounts of time. That costs money. That costs money that we cannot put into rehabilitative programs or other things because we are so busy paying for them. So by giving someone a longer sentence, they're not getting anything while they're in prison, but being warehoused.
Yeah.
And when they get out, what skills do they have? What hope do they have to rejoin us? What we want, what I think people want out of the criminal justice system is to have someone have the ability to get help. And a number of like domestic violence cases, someone will call. And in the majority of those cases, they will want that person to, you know, calm down from that specific situation, but get help for whatever brought them into the situation. But what happens is we have mandatory arrest laws. We have cases, I generally deal with cases that are domestic violence where the victims will write the prosecutor a letter saying, I do not want this to proceed, but the prosecutor will proceed anyways, despite what the alleged victim wants. And so these cases are going to trial where the family is not getting the help that they requested. The state is imposing, oh, we are going to convict this person no matter what. What they want is this person to be restored, to get treatment. And so what I think we need to provide is the treatment that they want, and not a stigmatizing that this person is evil. Yes, this person did a bad thing, but that we need to invite them to rejoin back to us.
It's like the wrong diagnosis for the problem. There's a problem that's out there, and instead of diagnosing it properly as to what it, like with the drug use, you know, when European countries treat that as a public health issue, then they go down a whole different road toward figuring out how can we reduce the medical harm to the person, how can we have the person help function in society. In the United States, we treat it as a criminal issue, and we go down a whole different road. And with domestic violence, like you say, if we would diagnose it as a problem of domestic violence, then deal with the violence, but don't go down in this path with that doesn't solve the problem.
And so I was recently was able to work with juveniles, and you'd have the regular juvenile court system, and then we had this juvenile drug court. And so in the regular system, the case just gets dealt with. But in the juvenile drug court system, you would have the defense attorney working on a team with the judge, with the prosecutor, with the treatment provider, and the kid would come to court, and you do things like clap every time they did something good. And you would say, well, what's happening with you this week? The judge is asking me a question, and the kid would have to respond. Well, I'm doing this. Why are you getting a job? Well, where are you looking? Do you need help getting the job? Can we help you with the resume? We can get a volunteer to do this. And so to see a kid get that help, and then have a prosecutor stand up when that kid graduates and goes, I really appreciate that you changed your life. When those kids leave, they have, they've been taught how to fish. you know, instead of just being given one. And instead of just being given jail time, they're being taught life skills. And when they have the life skills, then they don't come back.
Well, we've got the drug court here in this county that was one of the early drug courts, and that's worked well. I mean, I'll see reports or news articles about how more people have come through that, and they're not reoffending.
And we have a veterans court, which has been very successful here. Was one of the first ones in the state of Washington.
Yeah.
And so those folks are getting in touch with the resources that they need to help them with their particular situation, to get them the treatment that they need, and to get them the work that they need. So like with veterans, they'll get in touch with someone with a veteran who's at WorkSource, so they can go to WorkSource and then get the job. Yeah. What if we had that in the criminal justice system, that you could go to court and
get a job.
through court, you wind up with a job. That would be amazing.
Really,
or if you could go to court and they really could say, hey, we've got inpatient treatment beds, and that it was easy to do. You know, it sounds like easy to do, but I have a really hard time doing it, and I've been doing this for 17 years.
And it's got to be done before people are actually in prison. Maybe they can get some treatment then, but you shouldn't have to commit a crime and get into prison in order to get the treatment that you would
that's
help.
being really proactive. Is let's deal with poverty. Let's deal with dysfunction.
Education at the early level.
One thing that people don't understand about the criminal justice system is that it's adversarial.
Yeah.
Okay. When I became an attorney, my greatest wish was to destroy a witness on the stand and to show the jury that that witness was a liar. That was the greatest thing and the only thing that I wanted to do as an attorney. It wasn't to help my client get a job or to help him with treatment. It was to destroy a witness. And after juvenile drug court, I still like destroying a witness from time to time. That can be fun, but it doesn't mean anything. So the court system is meant to do this, not meant to do this.
Well, let's move into the restorative justice area, which is right where this goes, and both of you folks have been working with the Friends Committee on Washington Public Policy and other folks to create a model that's way better. So instead of like let's punish bad guys, the restorative justice model says who's hurting and let's help them get what they need.
Who's hurt whom and what damage has been done and how do we remedy that damage?
So tell us how restorative justice works, the concept and in practice and so forth.
Well, it's like I said, that you sit down with a group of people who have been involved in what has been labeled or could be labeled a criminal incidents, and the perpetrator, the victim broadly defined, usually involving the community, because in most crimes, it's not just the individual who suffered the direct harm who's been damaged, but it's also the community in which that individual exists.
It could be a neighborhood where now fear exists because of something, whereas people had not been afraid before.
Yeah, if my neighbor has their house burglarized, I'm going to probably be more fearful that my house is going to be burglarized, and that compromises my quality of life. So a restorative justice conference gives everyone who's been damaged the opportunity to sit down with the person who's done the damage, who frequently doesn't understand the broad impacts of what he or she has done, and says, well, what exactly was done? Gives the perpetrator an opportunity to say, well, this is what I did, this is why I did it, this is how I feel about it, to offer apologies when appropriate, to offer suggestions for remedy, and then gives everyone else an opportunity to say, this is how you hurt me, this is how you damaged me. And a lot of times for victims, just being able to share that provides a sense of relief, and the damage has been remedied by being able to look the perpetrator directly in the eye and say, this is what you did to me and this is how it hurt.
And it's done in a safe setting.
A very safe setting.
So it's voluntary for everybody to
And that's a very important
in
piece of it, because if it's, sometimes a victim would say, hey, I don't want to face the person who has victimized me. I don't want to risk being harmed again by an individual who has hurt me or abused me or in other ways damaged me.
So it's a restoring of the community then, if all the parties consent to this, that they come in and there's good facilitation in a safe space, and there's real healing and real restoring of that broken community.
And the facilitator is a very important player in the process to help people communicate and to set limits on inappropriate types of communication.
We did one of our TV programs a few years ago on restorative justice, and people can watch it still through our website, olympiafor.org. Just visit olympiafor.org, click the TV programs link, and scroll down until you see the program on restorative justice. And it also includes restorative practices beyond the justice system, because those same principles can be applied in other settings.
I was also thinking as Larry was talking about the changes that have been put in place in our juvenile justice system. So we're incarcerating far fewer juveniles than we have in the past, and we're intervening more quickly up front. And we have things like a Becca bill, so if people aren't attending school, they get involved in the court in the way that Larry was describing, where they go in and they talk to a judge, and the judge says, well, come on, tell me what's going on and what do you need and how can we help you succeed, versus waiting until they drop out of school and commit a crime, which is another interesting thing that I think 82% of the people who are in prison don't have a high school diploma. And so if we can help people connect at an early age with the communities in which they live and help them succeed, then we dramatically decrease the probability that they will become part of the criminal justice system later in life.
Instead, we've been on a treadmill that runs the opposite direction. The legislature says they can't afford things that actually help, like education and taking care of young people, because we got to fund these prisons instead. If we get off that treadmill, do the proactive, positive things, we'd save a huge amount, because prison budgets are about the biggest in any state. I mean, there's education, but prisons are a huge.
Prisons are expensive. I think Washington Corrections Department has an operating budget of $1.2 billion. That's a lot of money. And the good thing is, I think politicians on both the right and the left are realizing that putting people in prison is not necessarily making our communities safer and healthier. And they're looking at alternatives like we've implemented in the juvenile justice system to put in the adult correction system.
I don't know, it kind of reminds me of garbage. That you put garbage in a can and then it's supposed to stay at the landfill and it's not supposed to come back. And what we realize is that we don't have enough landfill space, and that we can't put as much stuff in the garbage. Well, people aren't garbage, they're people, and these people are going to come back.
Well,
and so we have a natural. I think we have a natural thing that when people do something that is bad, we want them to be over there. Or we want to exclude them because they've done something bad. But if they're going to be over there, they're going to stay over there. And they're going to not have a reason to join us back over here. And if you have a second class of people who are over there, they have their own society that is going to go over there that won't coincide with our society and will have more criminal tendencies because they don't have any reason to buy in.
Right.
And you've got to have a reason to buy in, to get the job, to get the house, to do the regular things that the rest of society is doing. Because if they don't have any reason to buy in, they've just got a reason to get what they want, when they want it, as fast as they want it, which can lead to a criminal lifestyle. Because you got no reason to buy in. So we need to take people who have done things and do the weirdest thing ever. And that is to bring them close. You got to bring them closer to us, so that we are saying, hey, we know that you did something that is incorrect. Here are the steps that you need to take to rejoin.
And we're so separated from this other society which is in a prison, because it's away in the prison. When I lived in Pennsylvania for a number of years, I, along with members of the Quaker meeting that I was part of, went in to visit the prisoners once a week, and we had a discussion, and I got to know a number of prisoners there, and really to get to a lot of respect for how articulate, how thoughtful many of these men, and they were men in this prison, were. And I think that this really opened up my mind to another part of society which I otherwise would not see. And I think that's so true for many of us.
Yeah. Well, and earlier in the program we were talking about how a lot of these problems are based on some underlying problems, you know, the social, economic, political problems even. And if we were to focus on solving those underlying problems, then that would make what you're all suggesting. If we have a politics based on fear and who could be the toughest and who can be the meanest toward the people we've excluded, then it doesn't allow for what you're saying, which is let's restore people.
Yeah, well, the court system is good about establishing facts. It's not good about why those facts happened.
Right.
And so it's not the place where you should be. It's the wrong place to be creating all these things.
Yeah.
But it's what society has left us with to do.
And this is why the restorative justice model is different, because it just takes a whole different approach. If people want to read about it, Howard Zehr, Z-E-H-R, has written a bunch of good books on restorative justice. I've read those and been studying up on this for some time. But it just makes all kinds of sense, but it's just outside of the mainstream. It's
very outside the mainstream, and we have a lot of laws, and the prosecutor's going to enforce those laws because I mean that's what they're paid to do. I mean, every prosecutor, I think, if you're going to be a prosecutor, you have to believe in what you're doing is right. But these other economic factors, or the way that people get into the system, are really affected.
And we have to realize that a great deal of the people who are in this system are in for really fairly minor crimes. And it may have to do with not paying fines that led to a license suspension. It may be simply possession of some drug that wasn't really damaging other people, was simply damaging themselves.
And it can be.
And we need to get these people back into our system so that they can develop their own lives.
Right.
One thing is to reduce felonies to misdemeanors in cases where we don't have something that's really serious.
Yeah.
The media bring to us all the time these serious crimes that have been found somewhere in the 4 million people that might live in the Puget Sound area, and there are always going to be some of them. And there are people who may really need to be in prison because of this. But there are many others who don't. And to save those people's lives so that they're reasonable, we need to change laws so that sentences aren't as long. They're much longer than they are in other comparable countries. So we don't have these mandatory minimum sentences, so that judges have the discretion to give lower sentences or no sentence at all, just probation. No sentence in prison, but give just probation.
So focus on the people who really need to be in prison from a public safety perspective.
Right, exactly.
And segment them out from the people who are only creating a threat to themselves, or if there's an opportunity to minimize the threat they create to, for others through restorative processes, to use those processes instead of incarceration. One of the things that I think most of us know prison does is stigmatize everyone, as Larry's talked about, and that increases the probability that an individual, once engaged in the criminal system, will commit another crime, and potentially a more serious crime.
Yeah, but when you mention judges, I don't think that people realize that judges, you would say, well, why don't they use this restorative thing? I mean, if the person gets convicted, why don't they just do the restorative things that you're talking about? Can't they do that already? Judges can only do things that are authorized by a statute. And so we don't have a statute that authorizes them to do that. When a judge receives a case, The judge normally does not receive the police report. They don't normally receive information about the person. So you can have a person plead guilty, but there's nothing given to the judge about who this person is and what their needs might be. Because there just isn't the resources to do that. So people believe that judges have a lot more power than they actually do. Judges find probable cause, it's a low standard, then the case goes away from the judge, it goes to the lawyers, and if the person comes back and pleads guilty, unless it is like a major sex offense, there's no pre-sentence report that comes to the judge about this person. So they're not able to do these restorative things because it's not set up for them to do.
Their hands are tied
Their hands
by
are
the
tied
laws.
by what the charge is for probable cause. Even if the judge doesn't think what's happening is fair, but the facts say there's probable cause, they have to find it, and they have to follow the rules as according to law. They can't do what's in their heart. They have to do. They have to follow this.
Well, I mean, I certainly agree with you. I just have to say that there's, at least with respect to restorative justice, the Friends Committee on Washington Public Policy did develop a bill with respect to restorative justice for juvenile cases of a certain type. And that was passed in 2012. And so it defines what that is and gives it as an option for diversion. And so at least that's in one area where, and it's the sort of thing that we hope to build on.
Right. So, and I'm very familiar with the diversion process.
Oh, sure,
and so that is something that just automatically goes into effect. And for juveniles, I thought that well, I use diversion all the time, and so and could. Refer people to a diversion who weren't initially authorized to it, and I think it's a wonderful program. And I think that one of the difference for me from the adult system was that the adult system doesn't have that diversion, and it gives you a lot more room to operate you have a lot more choices. And when you have more choices, in my opinion, you get less trials.
We've done a lot more with the juvenile justice system than we have with the adult correction system.
I hope that when we get a good track record of this, and then people can say, wow, this really works, then legislators will say, how can we apply this to the adult system? How can we apply this to more kinds of cases? And then, you got to start somewhere, but it's really quite workable, and the research keeps showing that this works. Recently I read, I don't remember where it was, I read something where some huge number of judges in their sentencing said explicitly, gee, I wish I could sentence you to less than this, but my hands are tied by the way the law was written, and this is totally unjust, but the law requires me to assign this unjust sentence. And there's some, I don't know the numbers, but it's a surprisingly high number of judges who feel frustrated by the way they're limited from doing real justice. I want to put in a plug for the Friends Committee on Washington Public Policy. We got a few minutes left. I want to make sure that people get a chance to understand the kinds of work that you folks are doing with Quakers and others. It's www.fcwpp.org. FICWIP is a handy way to say it. Tell us, well, you chair the statewide entity. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about what we do, and we're wrapping up pretty close here.
Okay, well, we work in the area of criminal justice, also in economic justice, healthcare, and in an environmental area as well. So we try to have at least a number of different areas in which we operate. And we simply work with the Quaker congregations, which are called meetings around the state, and send out alerts when appropriate for asking people if they will express their views on a particular issue to their members of the state legislature, since it is a state-oriented organization.
And I've been impressed. I've been contributing financially because you do such good work, and it's consistent with my values. I'm not a Quaker, but some of my friends are friends, and I appreciate the conscientious way you work, the issues, the values you do, and you folks have solid information, and a number of my friends help out So I'm just happy to have both of you on. So I'm hoping that people watching the show will have some new information, some new insights, maybe some creative ways that they can play with if they have any way of connecting with the system. The United States, as we said at the outset, imprisons this humongous number of people, and we can really do things a lot better. Other countries do things better. We used to do things better in some ways, but there are new things coming along like restorative justice that are starting to catch on. We need some transformative justice that'll address these underlying problems as well. For people who want to work on these issues, you can contact, or other issues, you can contact the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation, and we can get you connected. We're at 360-491-9093, and the website has a lot of information at www.olympiafor.org. You can also watch some of our previous TV programs that have dealt with criminal justice issues. We had one a few years ago on the 3 strikes laws, which are horribly unjust. We did one recently about how to reform prisons and sentencing. You were one of our guests. And we've done a program on restorative justice a few years ago. There's a lot of good stuff out there. www.olympiafor.org. Click the TV programs link. We are all one human family. We all share one planet. We can create a better world, but we all have to work at it. And the world needs what you have to offer. Thanks.